The dust came first, always did out here on the high plains, where the wind had nothing to stop it except a man's will or a woman's spine. Ayawamet felt the grit settle into the creases of his eyelids as he nudged the black gelding forward along the single-track rail line that cut through the yellow wheat like a scar through skin. His right shoulder throbbed where the cavalry saber had opened him 3 weeks back, the scab pulling tight every time he shifted his weight in the saddle. The horse was tired. He was tired. But tired didn't matter when you had nowhere else to go except forward. Dead Crow Station appeared as a cluster of weathered timber buildings squatting at the edge of the wheat heat shimmer, making them dance like spirits. The depot itself was 2 stories paint peeled down to gray wood, with a telegraph wire sagging from a crooked pole. A freight car sat derailed on a siding, its doors hanging open cargo long since picked clean by scavengers or thieves out here. There wasn't much difference between the two. Ayawamet reined in 30 yards out, studying the place with the kind of attention that had kept him breathing through 2 decades of frontier violence. A water barrel sat beside the depot porch. A single rocking chair empty. No smoke from the stovepipe. The only sound was the click, click, click of the telegraph inside, steady as a heartbeat in the snort of his gelding-smelling water. Then she stepped out, barefoot. That was the first thing he noticed. A white woman walking barefoot on splintered pine planks in the middle of August heat was either desperate or dangerous, and Ayawamet had learned long ago that those 2 conditions often lived in the same skin. She wore a dress that might have been blue, once now faded to the color of old bruises torn at the shoulder seam. One hand braced against the porch post like she needed it to stay upright. The other pressed against her ribs, fingers splayed as if holding something inside that wanted to come out. She was young, maybe 25, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a braid that had come half-undone wisps sticking to her neck with sweat. Her face was pale despite the sun, and the kind of pale that spoke of winter blood and northern roots, but her eyes were hard. German stock, he guessed. Homesteader's daughter or widow, one of the stubborn ones who stayed when everyone else with sense had run. Their eyes met and held. 3 full heartbeats. 4. Ayawamet's hand rested on his thigh, inches from the Winchester 73 cradled across his lap. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't reach for anything. Just stood there measuring him the way a man measures another man before a fight, looking for weakness, looking for intent, looking for truth. Behind him, the rail line glittered in the afternoon sun, twin ribbons of steel running straight toward the mountains, where the Lakota summer camps used to be. Beside him, the ruined freight car groaned as metal contracted in the cooling shadow of the depot. Between them hung a silence so thick he could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Then she spoke, voice low and steady, the kind of calm that comes from having already made peace with whatever comes next. "You can walk on, or you can help me keep this place from burning." Ayawamet said nothing. Words were cheap. He'd heard 1,000 promises from white mouths, watched half of them turn to lies before the sun set. But she wasn't finished. She took one careful step forward, favoring her left side where that hand pressed her ribs, and her voice dropped lower, meant only for him, even though they were 30 yards apart in open air. "Show me your full strength." His jaw locked. That phrase, those exact words, were what the old warriors used when they tested a young man for the war societies. It was a challenge that asked for everything: skill, courage, endurance, and the willingness to bleed for something larger than yourself. But coming from her mouth in English, it twisted into something different. She wasn't testing him for glory. She was asking if he had anything left to give after the world had taken everything else. Or maybe she was testing him for the rumors. The whispers that followed him like carrion birds. The story that said he'd traded his honor for safety, sold out his own people to the cavalry, for a promise of passage that saved his skin and no one else's. The kind of story that made men spit when they heard his name. "Show me your full strength." What if he had none left? His gelding shifted hooves scraping stone, and the movement broke the spell. Ayawamat's eyes flicked past her to the depot. Through the open door, he could see the telegraph key still chattering, which meant someone was inside, working it. He looked west along the track, then east. No other buildings close, no cattle, no wagons. The wheat field stretched empty, except for a few scattered scarecrows that might have been fence posts, or might have been something worse. "Bandits are coming," she said, reading his scan. "Tonight, maybe sooner. They want what I have, and they'll burn this place to hide what they've done." She paused, and for the first time, her voice wavered, just a hairline crack in the stone. "I can't stop them alone." Ayawamat looked at her again. At the torn dress, the bare feet, the hand pressed to ribs that might be broken or bruised or just held together by will. At the way she stood her ground on that porch, like it was the last defensible position in a war she'd been fighting long before he arrived. He thought about riding on. The mountains were 2 days north. There were places a man could disappear into the pine forests and never be found, places where the cavalry didn't go and the settlers hadn't reached yet. He could be gone by sunset, and whatever happened to this woman and her broken-down depot wouldn't touch him. But his horse was tired, and he was tired. And the water barrel was right there 20 feet away, and his canteen had been empty since dawn. Slowly, deliberately, Ayawamat swung down from the saddle. His boots hit the ground, and dust puffed up around his ankles. He took his time, making sure she saw every movement, lifting the Winchester from its scabbard, setting it carefully against the porch rail, with the barrel pointed down and away from the sun so the metal wouldn't warp. Loosening the rawhide tie on his short bow and quiver, and leaning them beside the rifle. Checking the cinch on his saddle so the gelding wouldn't spook and run. Each action was a small language. "I'm not here to harm you. I know how to handle weapons. I take care of what's mine." Only when he'd finished did he walk to the water barrel and lift the ladle. The water was warm, tasted of rust and minerals, but it was wet. He drank 3 ladles without stopping, feeling the liquid ease the dust in his throat. When he looked up, she'd come down from the porch. Barefoot in the dirt, now standing close enough that he could see the pale freckles across her nose, and the way her pupils had gone wide despite the bright light. She held a wet cloth in her hand, must have dipped it in a basin inside, and she lifted it slowly toward his face. "Your lips are cracked," she said. Not an order, not a plea, just a statement of fact. Ayawamat held still as she dabbed the cloth against his mouth, the cool wetness shocking against the split skin. Her fingers were steady, competent, the touch of someone who'd tended wounds before. He smelled lye soap and sweat and something faintly sweet, maybe bread dough or preserves. And under that, the sharper scent of fear held ruthlessly in check. Behind her, the telegraph went silent. A moment later, a boy appeared in the doorway, a maybe 15, skinny as a fence rail with a shock of red hair and a pronounced limp in his left leg. He carried a tin cup in each hand, eyes flicking between Ayawamat and the woman with the quick, nervous assessment of someone who'd learned young that survival meant reading danger fast. "Clara," the boy said, voice cracking on the second syllable. "You sure about this?" So her name was Clara. She didn't turn, kept her eyes on Ayawamat's face as she folded the cloth and tucked it into her apron pocket. "I'm sure, Jamie." The boy Jamie limped forward and set both tin cups on the edge of the water barrel. Close enough that when Clara reached for one and Ayawamat reached for the other, their knuckles brushed. Just for a second, barely contact at all, but enough that he felt the calluses on her fingers and the tremor she was trying to hide. "Bandits," Ayawamat said. His first words since arriving, and they came out rough, underused. "How many?" "6, maybe 8, Clara answered. "Led by a man named Burke, railroad foreman. He's been running freight through here that doesn't match the manifest's guns mostly. Selling them off the books. She glanced at Jamie. We have proof. That's why they're coming. Ayawamat drank the second cup of water and considered. Guns meant money. Money meant men willing to kill to protect it. 8 armed men against 1 broken-down depot with a woman, a crippled boy, and a Lakota warrior whose own people wouldn't claim him anymore. The mathematics of survival said to ride on. But something in Clara's eyes said she already knew that and was asking anyway. Show me, he said. The inside of Dead Crow Station smelled of dust, old paper, and the acrid tang of telegraph chemicals. A single room served as ticket office, freight sorting, and living quarters, with a pot-bellied stove in the corner and a narrow staircase leading to a sleeping loft. Maps yellowed with age covered one wall, showing rail lines spreading like veins across the territory. The telegraph key sat on a scarred wooden desk, beside a logbook, its pages covered in Jamie's tight, slanted script. Clara moved to the desk and pulled out a leather-bound ledger from a locked drawer, setting it carefully on the surface. This is 2 years of freight records. My husband kept them. He was the station master before he died last winter. Her voice stayed flat on the word died, no grief leaking through just fact. Every shipment that came through, every manifest, every signature. Burke's been altering the official copies in Cheyenne, but these are the originals. Ayawamat flipped through the pages. The handwriting was precise, Germanic, the kind of attention to detail that spoke of a man who believed order could hold back chaos. Dates, weights, cargo descriptions. But in the margins, in a different hand, Clara's, he guessed, were notes. Short 3 crates, extra rifle cases, not on Bill Burke, paid cash, no receipt. Your husband knew, Ayawamat said. He suspected. Took him a year to be sure. Clara's hand drifted to her ribs again, that unconscious gesture. He was going to report it to the federal marshal, but he got sick. Pneumonia. Took him in 4 days. She met Ayawamat's eyes. I think Burke helped it along. Jamie spoke up from where he was checking the stovepipe. There was a doctor passing through. Said Eric's fever was wrong too fast. But she couldn't prove nothing. Dr. Morrow, Clara added. She rides in twice a week now from Sand Creek Settlement, 20 miles north. She's the one who told me to keep records of everything in case. She trailed off. In case what? In case the law came? In case Burke made his move? In case someone with enough spine showed up to stand beside her, Ayawamat closed the ledger. Where is everyone else? This station served cattle drives, homesteaders. Should be families. Clara's face hardened. Burke and Sheriff Malloy scared them off. Burned out 3 farms last spring, called it accidents. Made it clear sell your claim cheap or watch it burn with you in it. Most folks left. Smart ones anyway. She gestured toward the window where the wheat fields shimmered in the heat. Miguel Ortega and his sister Ruth are still here 1/4 mile east. They farm wheat trade eggs and labor for supplies. Dr. Morrow refuses to leave because the settlements need her. And She stopped, swallowed. I couldn't go. Eric's buried here. Someone has to keep the telegraph open or this whole stretch of territory goes blind. Ayawamat understood that kind of stubbornness. The refusal to let go, even when letting go was the only sane choice. It was the same thing that kept him riding these empty plains instead of disappearing into the mountains where his cousins had fled after Little Bighorn. Why me? He asked. You don't know me. I know you're Lakota, Clara said bluntly. I know Burke hates Indians worse than he hates homesteaders. I know if you're riding alone through railroad territory in summer of 1876, you've got nowhere to go and nothing to lose. She paused. And I know you water your horse before yourself and set your weapons down with care. That tells me more than words do. Jamie coughed. Also, you're breathing and you're here. That's 2 more qualifications than we had an hour ago. Despite everything, Ayawamet felt his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. He looked at the boy more carefully. The limp was old healed wrong, probably from a badly set break. But his hands were quick and steady, and the way he moved spoke of someone used to working around pain. 15 years old, and already harder than most men twice his age. Burke comes tonight, Ayawamet asked. Maybe? Clara moved to the window, scanning the horizon. Jamie intercepted a telegraph 2 hours ago. Hidden code spaces between letters were wrong. Burke's sending a night freight through with cargo hidden under seed sacks. He'll torch the station after to erase the evidence and make it look like an accident. Grieving widow loses everything, no one asks questions. Except you have the ledger, which he doesn't know about. Yet. Clara turned back. If we can hold until morning, Dr. Morrow will bring a federal marshal from Sand Creek. She's riding there now. But we need to last the night, and we need proof he can't burn. Ayawamet thought. Night freight meant Burke had the crew bought off or scared. Torching the station meant he was willing to kill witnesses. 8 men with rifles against 4 people. Clara, Jamie himself, and maybe the doctor if she returned in time, in a wooden building full of paper and lamp oil. The odds were brutal, but he'd lived on brutal odds for 26 years. 1 more night wouldn't make a difference. Show me the grounds, he said. They walked the perimeter as the sun dropped toward the mountains, turning the wheat fields the color of old gold. Clara pointed out sight lines, approaches weak points. The station sat on a low rise with good visibility east and west along the track, but the freight siding and derailed car provided cover for anyone approaching from the south. To the north, a small cemetery marked by weathered crosses guarded a creek bed that ran bone dry in the summer heat, exposing smooth stones and the cracked earth where water used to flow. That's where Eric's buried, Clara said, nodding toward the cemetery. Under the big cottonwood. I go there every morning. Ayawamet noticed she didn't say to pray or to mourn. Just, I go there. As if it were a duty, a checkpoint away to mark time passing. They checked the water supply, a cistern fed by a spring-fed pipe that ran underground from higher ground to the west. Enough for 3 days if rationed. The fuel shed held coal for the stove and lamp oil, dangerous if ignited but necessary. Clara's provisions were lean cornmeal beans, salt pork, and a few jars of preserves. Enough to last a week, maybe, if stretched. You have a gun? Ayawamet asked. Clara led him back inside and lifted a Winchester Yellow Boy from behind the door, the brass receiver glinting dully. Eric taught me to shoot. I'm steady at 50 yards, passable at 100. Ayawamet checked the action, smooth, well-maintained, and nodded approval. He pulled a box of cartridges from his saddlebag and set it on the counter. Come outside. In the yard, he positioned her at 30 yards from a fence post. Sight it. Clara lifted the rifle, tucked the stock against her shoulder, and sighted down the barrel. Her stance was wrong weight, too far forward, elbows flared. Ayawamet stepped behind her, hands hovering. May I? She nodded. He steadied her shoulders, adjusting the angle, then guided her elbows in tight. His hands were careful, impersonal, but he felt her breathing shift as their bodies aligned. Short pull on the trigger, he murmured near her ear. Don't jerk. Squeeze like you're holding water and don't want to spill. She fired. The shot splintered the cedar post dead center. Clara lowered the rifle slowly, exhaling. When she turned her head, their faces were inches apart. How's that? Good, Ayawamet said. He stepped back, suddenly aware that Jamie was watching from the porch with an expression caught between concern and something else, hope maybe, or the kind of desperate optimism that came from having a plan, any plan, after months of fear. The sun touched the mountains. They had maybe 3 hours before full dark. Miguel Ortega arrived just after sunset, riding a sway-backed mule and carrying a burlap sack of eggs and 2 loaves of bread wrapped in cloth. He was small and wiry, maybe 40, with sun-scorched skin and hands scarred by fieldwork. His sister Ruth came behind on foot, a tall, raw-boned woman with her hair covered by a faded kerchief and her skirt kilted up out of the dust. "Clara," Miguel said, swinging down and handing over the sack. "Jamie sent word you need help. What happened?" Clara filled them in quickly, Burke the freight the threat. Miguel's face darkened. "That devil already burned my wheat last spring. Claimed lightning, but I know better." He glanced at Ayawamat, taking in the buckskin shirt, the braided hair, the stillness that marked him as other. "You trust him?" "I do," Clara said without hesitation. Miguel studied Ayawamat for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we stay. Ruth and me, we owe you for winter supplies when we couldn't pay. Ortega debts get paid." Ruth said nothing, just set down a canvas bag filled with more cornmeal and a jar of honey. But her eyes met Clara's, and something passed between the two women, a shared understanding of what it meant to hold ground when everyone else was running. They ate together as the stars came out, bread and eggs cooked over the stove, washed down with bitter coffee. Jamie rewired a loose connection on the telegraph and tested the key, sending out a rhythmic pattern that meant all clear to anyone listening. Ayawamat cleaned his Winchester and checked his ammunition, 23 rounds, for the rifle 6 for his revolver. Not enough for a sustained fight, but enough if he made each shot count. Clara watched him work, and after a while she sat down across from him with her own rifle and a cleaning rod. They worked in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that came from shared purpose. At one point their hands reached for the same oil rag. Her fingers brushed his and lingered for a half-second longer than necessary. Neither of them spoke, but when Ayawamat looked up, he found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Part calculation, part curiosity, part something softer that she buried quickly. "Tell me about the rumors," she said finally, voice low enough that the others by the stove couldn't hear. Ayawamat's hands stilled on the rifle. "What rumors?" "The ones that say you betrayed your people to the cavalry." Clara met his eyes. "I don't care if they're true, but I need to know who you are." It was a fair question, honest, the kind that deserved an honest answer. "I met with Major Kincaid last spring," Ayawamat said slowly. "Negotiated a ceasefire that let 2 camps, women, children, elders, move to safer ground before the cavalry swept through. I refused payment. Refused safe passage for myself. All I asked was time and a creek route they'd leave open." He paused. "My cousin Kangi Red Knife wanted to fight. Said negotiating was surrender. When I chose peace over glory, he spread word that I'd sold out. Took money. Played the traitor." His jaw tightened. "My people believed him, so I left." Clara absorbed that. "Did the ceasefire work?" 200 people made it north, alive. "Then you did right. Doesn't matter if they think I didn't." Clara set down her cleaning rod and leaned forward. "It matters. Truth always matters, even if it takes time to come out." She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand briefly, a butterfly contact that grounded him. "Show me your full strength doesn't mean prove you're not a traitor. It means fight like you still have something worth protecting." Ayawamat looked at her hand on his, at the scarred knuckles, and the dirt under her nails, and the steady pressure that said, "I see you." "All right," he said. Outside the wind picked up. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not a storm, not this time of year, but the sound of rails vibrating under weight. The night freight was coming. Jamie's hand flew across the telegraph key, transcribing the clicks into letters with the speed of someone who lived by the rhythm of Morse code. Ayawamat watched from the doorway, impressed despite himself by the boy's focus. Clara stood beside the desk, one hand resting lightly on Jamie's shoulder, reading the transcription as it formed. Then Jamie's fingers stopped. He tapped the key twice, wait, and leaned closer, counting under his breath. "That's wrong," he muttered. "What's wrong?" Clara asked. "The spacing. Between letters. It's off." Jamie grabbed a pencil and started marking the message. "Look, standard code is dot dash space dot dash. But this sender is doing dot dash space space dot dash. Double gaps. Deliberate." Ayawamat stepped closer. "Hidden message." "Yeah." Jamie's pencil flew, rewriting the text by pulling only the letters that followed the double spaces. After 30 seconds, he sat back. "Blazes." Clara read over his shoulder, and her face went pale. "Night freight, 11 p.m. Stop rifles under siege. Stop burn station. Stop no witnesses." Miguel, who'd been dozing by the stove, jerked upright. "That's 2 hours from now." "Who sent it?" Ruth asked. Jamie checked the originating code. "Cheyenne main office. But the operator is using Macklin's fist, his sending rhythm. Macklin's the old-timer who works graveyard shift. He's been friendly to us." He looked at Clara. "He's warning us." Ayawamat's mind raced through the tactical implications. Night freight meant limited visibility. Rifles under siege meant Burke could claim the station attacked first if anyone investigated. Burn station meant fire quick, total destroying all evidence. No witnesses meant anyone inside was meant to die. "We need the ledger out of here," Clara said, reaching for the drawer. "If the station burns, we lose everything." "Where?" Ayawamat asked. Clara's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the dark line of the dry creek bed and the cemetery beyond. "The burial vault, under the tracks." Ayawamat frowned. "Vault." When they laid the rail line, they built a stone culvert to channel spring floods. It runs under the tracks, feeds the cistern when there's water. Inside the culvert, there's an old burial vault settler family from 20 years back before the railroad came. Stone walls, sealed door. It stays cool year-round. She grabbed a coat from the hook. "Eric hid important papers there sometimes. If we can get the ledger inside, even if the station burns, the proof survives." It was smart, but also dangerous. The culvert was narrow, dark, and Ayawamat had seen enough of the frontier to know probably home to rattlesnakes seeking the shade and coolness, even when water was scarce. "I'll go," he said. "We'll both go." Clara wrapped the ledger in oilcloth and tied it tight. "You don't know which vault, and it's my proof to protect." There was no arguing with that tone. Ayawamat checked his revolver, made sure his knife was loose in its sheath. Miguel stood. "I'll watch the track. Ruth, stay with Jamie and keep the telegraph open. Anything moves, you signal." They moved fast. Clara led the way across the yard, past the cemetery crosses ghostly in the starlight, down into the creek bed where the earth was cracked and dusty stones bare and dry. The culvert entrance was a dark mouth in the bank, barely 3 feet high, stone-lined and slick with algae despite the drought. The smell hit Ayawamat, immediately damp earth, old water, and the dry dust musk of snakes. "Stay behind me," he said, dropping to his belly and pulling himself forward with his elbows. The stone scraped his shoulders, the air thick and close. 10 feet in, he heard it, the dry rattle that froze his blood. Ayawamat went still. A head coiled on a flat stone, a diamondback rattler, and the length of his arm, watched him with unblinking eyes. The rattle blurred a sound like seeds shaken in a gourd, warning and promise combined. Behind him, Clara whispered, "What is it?" "Snake. Don't move." Ayawamat's hand crept to his knife. Too far to strike. Too close to retreat without provoking it. He felt for a loose stone with his free hand, found one the size of an egg. Slowly, carefully, he lobbed it past the snake toward the far end of the culvert. The stone clattered. The snake's head swiveled toward the sound body, uncoiling slightly. Ayawamat lunged forward, flattening himself against the opposite wall, scraping past the snake with inches to spare. The rattler struck at the movement fangs, clicking against stone where his leg had been a heartbeat before. Then he was past, rolling deeper into the culvert as the snake slithered away into a crack. His heart hammered. He forced breath into his lungs, then whispered back, "Clear. Come slow." Clara crawled forward, face pale but determined. She passed the spot where the snake had been without looking, eyes fixed on Ayawamat. When she reached him, her hand found his arm and gripped tight just for a moment before letting go. "There," she whispered, pointing. Cut into the culvert wall was a low stone door, barely 2 feet square, with an iron ring for a handle. Old mortar crumbled around the edges. Ayawamat pulled and the door scraped open with a groan that sounded like a scream in the enclosed space. Inside was darkness and the smell of dry bone. Clara pushed the oilcloth bundle through the opening, far back into the vault where even a fire's heat wouldn't reach. She whispered something Ayawamat couldn't hear, a prayer maybe, or a promise to the dead, then pulled the door shut and wedged a stone against it to keep it sealed. "Done," she breathed. They crawled backward out of the culvert, faster now, desperate for open air. Ayawamat emerged first and reached down to pull Clara up the bank. His hands closed around her wrists, and for a moment they stood close in the darkness, both breathing hard, both filthy with algae and dust, both alive. Then Jamie's voice cut through the night, sharp with fear. "Riders?" Ayawamat sprinted for the station, Clara close behind. As they rounded the depot, he saw them, 2 men on a handcar pumping the lever arm to push the little rail cart along the tracks from the east. They were maybe 200 yards out, moving fast silhouettes against the starlit wheat. "Burke's scouts," Miguel hissed from where he crouched by the platform. "They'll see the lights, know we're here." "Jamie, kill the lamps," Clara ordered. The boy moved fast, dousing the oil lamps, until only the faint glow of the stove embers remained. The depot fell into shadow. Ayawamat's mind raced. If the scouts reported back that the station was occupied and alert, Burke would come in force, ready for a fight. But if the scouts disappeared, Burke might assume the station was already empty, burned, or abandoned. It would buy time, maybe until morning, maybe long enough for Dr. Morrow to return with the marshal. "We take them," Ayawamat said. "Quiet. Before they get close enough to be sure what they're seeing." Clara nodded. "How?" "I'll go under the platform, cut the drive belt on the car. When they stop, you and Miguel cover from the depot. Don't shoot unless you have to, noise carries." He didn't wait for agreement. Ayawamat grabbed his knife and ran low across the open ground to the rail line, dropping flat in the shadow beneath the freight platform. The handcar's wheels squealed as it approached men too confident, not bothering with stealth. He heard their voices, now rough and careless. "Ought to be burned already," Burke said. "Burke says a lot. I don't see no smoke." The handcar rolled overhead. Ayawamat reached up through the gap between ties and slashed at the leather drive belt connecting the pump lever to the axle. The belt parted with a snap, and the car lurched, throwing both men forward. "What in blazes?" Ayawamat exploded from under the platform, knife in one hand, and slammed into the first man before he could draw his gun. They went down in a tangle of limbs, rolling off the tracks into the dirt. The man was big, smelled of whiskey and sweat, and fought with the dumb viciousness of someone used to winning by size alone. Ayawamat hooked a knee into his gut, drove an elbow into his jaw, and when the man's head snapped back, pressed the knife against his throat. "Don't," Ayawamat said. The man froze. The second scout had jumped clear of the car and gone for his revolver. Clara stepped out of the depot's shadow Winchester leveled. "Drop it." The scout hesitated, gun half drawn. Miguel appeared on his flank holding a pitchfork like a spear. The scout looked at the three of them, did the math, and let the revolver fall. "Hands up," Clara said. Her voice was steady, but Ayawamat saw the fine tremor in the rifle barrel. Adrenaline, fear, or both. The scout raised his hands. Then everything went wrong. The big man under Ayawamat twisted, trying to throw him off. Ayawamat's knife slipped, cutting shallow across the man's collarbone, enough to bleed, not enough to stop him. The scout by the handcar saw Clara's attention shift and lunged for his dropped gun. The revolver barked, once deafening in the night. The shot went wide, but close. Ayawamat felt the air crack past his ear. Clara jerked the Winchester to her shoulder and fired. The shot caught the scout's hand, and the revolver spun away in a spray of blood and screaming. Miguel rushed forward, planting the pitchfork between the man's boots. "Stay down." Ayawamat drove his fist into the big man's temple once, twice, until the body went limp. He rolled clear, breathing hard, and looked up. Clara stood frozen, the rifle still shouldered, staring at the blood spreading across the wounded scout's hand. Her face was white as chalk. "Clara!" Ayawamat rose, moved to her. "Clara, look at me." Her eyes snapped to his wide and shocked. "I shot him." "You stopped him." Ayawamat took the rifle gently from her hands and set it aside, then gripped her shoulders. "You did right. He would have killed us." She nodded, but he could see the tremor spreading from her hands to her arms. First blood was always hard. He'd seen warriors freeze after their first kill, seen men weep or vomit or laugh wildly. Clara just shook, silent and fierce, refusing to let it break her. Behind them, Jamie and Ruth were already moving, dragging the unconscious man toward the depot. Miguel wrapped the wounded scout's hand in a strip of cloth torn from the man's own shirt, then bound both men's wrists with telegraph wire, thin, strong, impossible to break without tools. "Inside," Clara said, voice still shaky but gaining strength. "We need to question them." They hauled both men into the depot and propped them against the wall. The big one came around slowly, groaning and spitting blood. The wounded one whimpered and cursed, clutching his hand. Ayawamat crouched in front of them. "Where's Burke?" "Go to hell," the big one muttered. Ayawamat stood and stepped back. "Clara, your station, your questions." Clara moved forward, and despite the fear still etched in her face, she stood tall. "Burke sent you ahead to scout. Why?" The big one sneered. "You're already dead, widow. You just don't know it yet." "Maybe." Clara's hand drifted to her ribs again, that unconscious tell, but her voice stayed cold. "But you'll go first. See, out here, no one will ask too many questions about two of Burke's men who disappeared. Snakes, sickness, fall off a handcar in the dark." She let that sink in. "Or you tell me when he's coming, how many men, and maybe we all live through this." The wounded scout broke first, voice high and cracking. 11, like the wire said. Burke's bringing the freight through at 11, 6 men on the train, 2 more riding in from the south. 8 total plus the engineer he's got bought. After they unload the guns, they're supposed to douse the station with lamp oil and light it up. He swallowed. "Burke said to make sure nobody walks out." "Why?" Clara pressed. "Why burn it?" Ledger, the big one, spat. "Burke knows the old station master kept records. Figures you got 'em. Can't let him reach the marshal. Clara's jaw tightened. What does Burke get out of this? The wounded man laughed a bitter sound. Land. Once the station burns and you're gone, he files a claim, calls it abandoned property. Him and Malloy got it worked out. Sheriff backs his claim, Burke gets the whole section. Water rights, rail access, everything. Worth 10 times what the guns bring. Miguel swore in Spanish. Ruth's face hardened. Jamie looked at Clara with something like awe. She'd been right all along. Ayahuamat straightened. 11 o'clock. That's 1 hour. Clara turned to him, and for the first time since the fight, the tremor in her hands stilled. She crossed the room to where her Winchester leaned, picked it up and checked the load. When she looked back, her eyes were clear. "We're not running," she said. "We're not hiding. We hold until dawn, and we make certain Burke and his men know we're not afraid." She glanced at the 2 captives. "Tie them in the loft. Gag them. If they make noise, they die." Jamie and Miguel hauled the men upstairs. Clara walked to the door and looked out into the dark where the rail line gleamed faintly under the stars. Ayahuamat joined her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You did good," he said quietly. Clara glanced at him, and for a moment her mask cracked. "I'm terrified." "I know." He held her gaze. "Do it anyway." A ghost of a smile. "Show me your full strength." Something like that. Outside, the wind shifted. Ayahuamat smelled smoke, faint, far away, but real. He scanned the horizon and saw a thin line of orange low to the south, growing brighter. Not the freight train, not Burke's men. Prairie fire. Clara saw at the same moment. Her hand flew to her mouth. Blasted. The lightning from earlier, it must have caught in the dry grass. Miguel rushed to the door. "That's 5 miles out. If the wind pushes it this way, we'll burn before Burke ever gets here." Ruth finished. Ayahuamat's mind raced. Fire moved faster than men, faster than horses. If it reached the depot's fuel shed, the lamp oil would turn the place into an inferno. They had maybe 30 minutes, maybe less, before the flames arrived. "Fire break," he said. "Now. Shovel a line between the fire and the station wide down to bare dirt. If we can starve it before it reaches us, we might have a chance," Clara finished. She grabbed a shovel from the corner. Miguel, Ruth grabbed tools. "Jamie, keep the telegraph open in case Dr. Morrow tries to reach us. Ayahuamat with me." They ran. The heat hit first a dry baking wave that sucked the moisture from Ayahuamat's throat and made the air shimmer like water. The prairie fire was a living thing, low and fast, devouring the drought-dead wheat in great gulps of orange and red. Embers rode the wind like fireflies, landing in the short grass around the depot and catching instantly. "Here!" Clara shouted, dropping to her knees 30 yards from the fuel shed. "We dig here straight line to the dry creek bed." Ayahuamat slammed his shovel into the earth. The ground was hard-baked by months of sun, and each strike sent shocks up his arms. Beside him, Clara worked with furious determination, throwing dirt behind her in rhythmic heaves. Miguel attacked the line from the other end, Ruth beside him with a rake scraping grass and debris away to expose bare soil. The fire roared closer. Ayahuamat tasted ash. His eyes streamed and his lungs burned, but he kept digging, shovel biting deep, piling dirt in a low berm that might be enough to turn the flames. Water. Jamie appeared with 2 buckets sloshing from the cistern. He splashed one along the berm, and the earth hissed and steamed. "That's all we can spare." Ayahuamat didn't answer, just dug faster. His shoulders screamed where the old cavalry wound pulled tight, but pain was just noise. He shoved it down and focused on the work dig, lift, throw. Dig, lift, throw. Beside him, Clara's breathing turned ragged, her face black with soot. But she didn't slow. Then her shovel slipped. She gasped and dropped to one knee hand, flying to her ribs, where the old injury flared. Blood seeped through her dress, not fresh, but the wound had reopened. Ayawamat dropped his tool and crouched beside her. "Stop. You're bleeding." "I'm fine." But her voice was thin, thready with pain. "You're not." He gripped her arm, firm but gentle. "Rest. I'll finish this." Clara's eyes blazed even through the tears the smoke wrung from them. "You can't do it alone." "Then let me help you first." He tore a strip from his shirt, folded it into a pad, and pressed it against the wound at her ribs. Her breath hissed, but she let him tie it tight. Better, barely. But when she stood again, the pressure of the binding held, and she picked up her shovel with grim resolve. The fire reached the break with a howl. Flames leaped at the bare dirt like a predator, testing a fence found nothing to feed on, and swerved sideways, racing toward the dry creek bed where the grass was thinner. Ayawamat watched it pass, heart pounding, then turned to Clara. She was staring at the flames with an expression of hollow relief and complete exhaustion. Her hands shook so badly the shovel slipped from her fingers. Ayawamat caught her before she fell. "I've got you." "I can walk," she protested, but her knees buckled. "I know." He lifted her one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, and carried her toward the depot. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and will with nothing extra left to give. Her head rolled against his chest, and for a moment he felt the rapid flutter of her heartbeat through her ribs. "Show me your full strength," she whispered, half delirious. "You're doing it." "So are you," he answered. Miguel and Ruth followed, faces drawn with exhaustion. They'd saved the fuel shed, saved the station. But the cost was written in their shaking hands, and the way Miguel leaned heavily on his shovel like a crutch. Inside, Jamie had wet cloths waiting. Ayawamat set Clara on a bench and stepped back to let Ruth tend the wound. The bleeding had slowed, but the bandage was soaked through. Clara's eyes found his across the room, holding for a long moment, and he saw in them something he hadn't expected: gratitude, yes, but also trust. The kind of trust that said, "I would do this again with you, even knowing how it ends." Then she looked away, and the moment passed. Jamie checked his pocket watch. 10:15. We've got 45 minutes before the freight. "And Burke doesn't know about the fire," Miguel said. "He'll come in expecting to find us already panicked, disorganized. Instead, we're ready." Clara finished. She stood testing her balance and nodded. "We're ready." But Ayawamat wasn't sure that was true. They were alive, yes. The station still stood. But they'd burned through their strength fighting the fire, and Burke's men would arrive fresh and armed. 8 against 5, with one of the 5 wounded and another barely more than a boy. Before he could voice the thought, the telegraph key began to chatter. Jamie's fingers flew to transcribe, eyes widening as he read. "It's from Sand Creek. Dr. Morrow got through the marshal, is on his way. He's taking the morning local, should arrive just after dawn." Clara straightened despite the pain. "Tell her we'll hold." Jamie's fingers danced across the key. "We'll hold, stop Burke coming tonight. Stop, send help, dawn." The reply came fast. Understood, stop marshal armed. Stop, hold station. Stop, no heroics. "No heroics," Miguel muttered. Easy for her to say. But the message changed something. They weren't alone anymore. Help was coming. They just had to survive until dawn. 10 minutes before 11, hoofbeats sounded outside. Fast, desperate, coming from the north. Everyone grabbed for weapons. Ayawamat leveled his Winchester at the door as it banged open. and Dr. Abigail Morrow stumbled in, soot-stained and wild-eyed, her riding skirt torn and her medical bag slung over one shoulder. "Thank the stars," she gasped. I saw the fire and thought. She took in the room, the exhausted faces, Clara's bloody dress, the bound men in the loft. What happened? Clara filled her in with clipped sentences. Dr. Morrow's face hardened with each word. When Clara finished, the doctor set her bag on the table and pulled out a small leather notebook, flipping to a page covered in neat handwriting. "I reached the marshal. He's riding with the morning local. Will be here at first light." She looked at Clara. "Can you hold until then?" "We'll hold," Clara said. Dr. Morrow nodded and moved to examine Clara's wound fingers, quick and sure. "This needs proper stitches, but a field wrap will do for now." She pulled out a needle and catgut thread soaked both in alcohol and set to work. Clara didn't flinch, just gripped the table edge until her knuckles went white. Ayawamat watched the doctor work, impressed by her competence. Abigail Morrow was maybe 40, lean and weathered with the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that came from years of frontier medicine, where hesitation meant death. She finished stitching, wrapped Clara's ribs tight, and stood back. "You'll live. Try not to get shot before morning." Clara laughed, a thin, exhausted sound. "I'll do my best." Dr. Morrow turned to Ayawamat. "And you let me see that shoulder." He hesitated, then pulled aside his shirt. The cavalry wound had scabbed over, but the exertion of digging had cracked it open again. Dr. Morrow cleaned it with alcohol that burned like fire, applied a poultice that smelled of sage and something bitter, and bound it with clean linen. "You've had worse," she observed. "Yes. You'll have worse tonight, too, if what Clara says is true." She met his eyes. "Can you fight?" Ayawamat thought about the question. His shoulder ached, his ribs were bruised from the scuffle with Burke's scout, and exhaustion dragged at his bones. But he'd fought through worse. Fought half-starved, half-frozen, outnumbered and surrounded, and survived. "I can fight," he said. Dr. Morrow nodded. "Good, because Burke isn't coming alone and he doesn't take prisoners." Jamie's voice cut through the tension, sharp and sudden. "Train whistle, he's coming." They rushed to the window. Far down the track, a single headlamp pierced the darkness, growing brighter. The night freight. Burke's rolling fortress loaded with stolen guns and men willing to kill to keep their secret. Clara picked up her Winchester and checked the load one last time. Miguel and Ruth moved to cover the windows. Jamie stood by the telegraph fingers, hovering over the key in case he could send one last message. Dr. Morrow pulled a compact revolver from her medical bag and set it on the table, a .38, small but deadly at close range. Ayawamat moved to the door and looked out at the approaching train. Its whistle screamed again, and he felt the vibration through the platform boards under his boots. Behind him, Clara stepped close, so close he could hear her breathing, ragged but steady. "No matter what happens," she said quietly, meant only for him, "Thank you." He didn't answer. Words felt too small. Instead, he reached back and found her hand in the dark, squeezed once, and let go. The train roared into the station. The freight engine hissed to a stop beside the platform brakes, squealing like wounded animals. Steam billowed from the stack, and for a moment the world was nothing but white fog and the stink of coal smoke. Then figures emerged, 6 men with rifles, moving with the coordinated purpose of a group that had done this before. Burke stepped down from the cab. Even in the dim light, Ayawamat recognized him, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face like weathered granite, and eyes that assessed everything with the cold calculation of a man who measured the world in profit and loss. He wore a railroad foreman's coat over a gun belt that held a revolver and a knife. "Clara." Burke's voice boomed across the yard. I know you're in there. Come out and we'll talk. Stay inside and we torch the place with you in it. Clara stepped onto the porch, Winchester held low, but ready. Ayawamet flanked her left, Miguel her right, both with rifles aimed at Burke's men. Behind them, the depot windows bristled with guns, Ruth, Dr. Morrow, Jamie, all visible, all armed. Burke's eyes swept the scene and narrowed. You've been busy, widow. I'm impressed. But you're outgunned, and you know it. I know you're stealing from the railroad and selling guns to whoever pays. Clara said, voice loud and clear. I know you killed my husband to keep him quiet. And I know you plan to burn me alive and take my land. Burke smiled, a cold reptile expression. Proof's hard to come by when it's ashes, and you're standing in a kindling box. He gestured to his men. 2 minutes to clear out, or we start shooting. Federal marshals coming at dawn, Dr. Morrow called from the window. You burn us, you hang. Walk away now, you might reach Mexico by noon. Burke's smile widened. The marshal lady, the marshal, doesn't come out here unless someone asks. And the only law between here and Sand Creek is Sheriff Malloy, who works for me. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. I've got a signed statement from the sheriff that this station's been abandoned. Clara Weiss refused legal orders to vacate, and a tragic fire resulted from her negligence. He held up the paper. See legal? Clara's hands tightened on the Winchester. You're lying. Maybe. Maybe not. Burke tucked the paper away. Either way, by morning, there won't be anyone left to argue. Ayawamet stepped forward. You've got one problem. Burke's eyes flicked to him, dismissive. And what's that, scout? I'm still alive. The temperature dropped. Burke studied Ayawamet more carefully now, taking in the buckskin, the braided hair, the stillness. I know you. Ayawamet, the traitor who sold out Little Bighorn. He chuckled. So the widow's got herself a tame Indian. That's supposed to scare me. No, Ayawamet said. Just making sure you know who kills you when this starts. Burke's face darkened. He raised his hand to signal his men, and a voice called from behind the train, sharp and familiar. Burke, wait. A figure strode into the lamplight. Lakota, dressed in a mix of white man's trousers and a traditional shirt with a knife at his belt and a Winchester slung across his back. Ayawamet's breath caught. Kangi Red Knife. His cousin, the man who'd spread the rumors, who'd called him traitor, who'd driven him out of the camps with lies and poison words. Clara's hand found Ayawamet's arm steadying. You know him. Yes. The word came out flat, empty of emotion, but inside Ayawamet's chest, something cold and sharp unfurled. Kangi walked forward with the easy confidence of someone who held all the cards. He ignored Burke and fixed his eyes on Ayawamet. Cousin, I heard you were here. Thought I'd come see for myself if the great peacemaker was still hiding behind white women's skirts. Kangi. Ayawamet kept his voice level. Working with Burke now, or did he pay you like he paid everyone else? Kangi grinned. Burke pays well, better than the honor you threw away. He glanced at Clara. And she pays in desperation. Tell me, does she know you're the reason 200 of our people had to run like dogs? Does she know you broke bread with the butcher? I saved them, Ayawamet said. You made them refugees. Kangi spat. You traded pride for survival, and now you do it again, fighting for her for this. He gestured at the depot with contempt. At least Burke's honest. He wants land and money. What do you want, cousin? Ayawamet didn't answer, because the truth was he didn't know anymore. Survival, redemption, or just a place to stand where someone looked at him and saw strength instead of shame. Burke stepped between them. Touching reunion, but we've got work. Kangi, you said the widow had a ledger. Time to hand it over, Clara. Clara lifted her chin. Burn in hell. Burke sighed. Wrong answer. He turned to his men. Fire the shed. We'll smoke them out. Two of Burke's men moved toward the fuel shed, rifles slung carrying torches. Ayawamet raised his Winchester, and Miguel fired first. The shot cracked across the yard, and one of the torchbearers dropped with a scream, clutching his leg. Burke's men scattered, diving for cover behind the freight car and the platform. Return fire erupted, bullets splintering the depot walls. Ayawamet shoved Clara back inside and dropped to one knee behind a water trough. He sighted on a man leaning around the boxcar and fired. The shot hit the man's shoulder, spinning him around. Another rifle cracked from the depot window, Dr. Morrow, her aim steady, and a second attacker fell. But Kangi was already moving. He sprinted across the open ground toward the well at the side of the depot, using darkness and smoke for cover. Ayawamet saw his intent, immediately cut off the water supply, trapped them inside without relief. He rolled from behind the trough and ran to intercept. They met at the well like thunder. Kangi swung the butt of his rifle. Ayawamet blocked with his forearm and drove his shoulder into Kangi's chest. They crashed into the well's stone wall, grappling, kicking, all the old blood and betrayal boiling over into violence. You should have fought, Kangi snarled, driving a knee toward Ayawamet's gut. You should have died with honor. Ayawamet twisted, took the knee on his hip, and slammed an elbow into Kangi's jaw. I chose life over glory. That's not betrayal, it's wisdom. It's cowardice. They broke apart, circling. Behind them the firefight raged, Burke's men trying to reach the fuel shed, Clara and the others holding them off with disciplined volleys. But here at the well, it was just the two of them, and the weight of every broken promise. Kangi lunged with his knife. Ayawamet sidestepped, grabbed Kangi's wrist and twisted. The knife fell. Kangi drove a fist into Ayawamet's wounded shoulder, and pain exploded white and hot. Ayawamet gasped, but held on, hooking his leg behind Kangi's and slamming him to the ground. They rolled fists and elbows and desperate gasps until Kangi's back hit the well wall and Ayawamet pinned him there, forearm across his throat. I didn't betray them, Ayawamet said, voice ragged. I saved them. And you know it. Kangi glared, eyes full of hate and something else, envy maybe, or regret. Doesn't matter. You're still the one who chose them over us. No. Ayawamet leaned closer. I chose children over pride, women over war, life over death. And if that makes me a traitor in your eyes, then I'm a traitor. For a moment, Kangi's eyes flickered doubt, or maybe just exhaustion. Then he spat blood and laughed, a bitter sound. You always were weak. Ayawamet released him and stepped back, retrieving Kangi's knife from the dirt. Then why are you still trying to kill me? Before Kangi could answer, Clara screamed. Ayawamet spun. One of Burke's men had reached the depot door. Clara stood in the doorway. Winchester empty, as the man raised his revolver, Ayawamet threw the knife. It wasn't a clean throw, wasn't a killing blow, but the blade caught the man in the upper arm, and he dropped the gun with a howl. Jamie burst from the door with a piece of firewood and clubbed the man across the skull. He went down hard. But the distraction cost. Burke's remaining men used the opening to rush the fuel shed. Torches arced through the air, landed on the roof. Flames caught instantly, and within seconds, the shed was a roaring inferno. Fall back, Clara shouted. Everyone inside. They retreated into the depot, slamming the door and barring it. Outside, Burke's voice rose in triumph. You've got 5 minutes before the fire spreads to the stations. Last chance, Clara, throw out the ledger, and we let you walk. Clara leaned against the wall, panting, her face streaked with soot and blood. She looked at Ayawamat. "We don't have the ledger." "I know." "So what do we do?" Ayawamat's mind raced. The fire would spread fast, fuel oil burned hot and high, and the depot's wooden walls would catch like tinder. They could stay and die in the flames, or run outside and die in the gunfire. Neither option was acceptable. Then he remembered. The ledger. The vault. The truth. "Clara," he said slowly. "The ledger. Did you look inside it?" "Of course. Why?" "All of it. Every page. Every margin." Clara frowned, then understanding dawned. "You think there's something we missed?" "I think your husband was careful. If he hid the ledger in a vault, maybe he hid something else inside the ledger itself." They pulled the oilcloth bundle from where Clara had stuffed it under the stairs after retrieving it from the vault. The ledger was damp but intact. Clara flipped through the pages, squinting in the dim light, and then her hand stopped. There. Wedged in the spine, barely visible, was a folded piece of paper. She pulled it free and unfolded it. Army letterhead. Official seal. Signed at the bottom, Major Ezra Kincaid, United States Cavalry. Clara read aloud, her voice shaking, to Station Master Eric Weiss, confirming receipt of ceasefire terms negotiated by Lakota delegate Ayawamat. Terms accepted. Creek route secured for civilian passage as requested. Delegate refused compensation, requesting only safe conduct for women and children. 2 camps evacuated without incident. Lives saved estimated 200. Commendation for humanitarian action filed. Signed, Major E. Kincaid. The room went silent. Clara looked up at Ayawamat, her face pale. "You told me you negotiated a ceasefire. You didn't tell me you saved 200 people. You didn't tell me the cavalry commended you." "It didn't matter," Ayawamat said. "Kongi's story spread faster than the truth. It matters." Clara's hands trembled as she held the letter. Eric knew. He hid this letter with the proof of Burke's crimes because he knew someday someone would need to see it. He believed in you. Her voice cracked. "I believe in you." Dr. Morrow took the letter, read it quickly, and nodded. "This changes everything. It's proof that the rumors were lies. Proof that you acted with honor." Miguel crossed himself. "You're no traitor, friend." Ayawamat couldn't speak. The weight he'd carried for months, the shame, the isolation, the endless doubt cracked open like a frozen river in spring. Not gone, but thawed, breathable. Outside, Burke pounded on the door. "Time's up." Clara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bodice, close to her heart. Then she picked up her Winchester, checked the load one last time, and looked at Ayawamat. "Show me your full strength," she said. "Not because I doubt you, but because I know you have it." He met her eyes and saw in them what he'd been searching for since the day he left his people. Not forgiveness, he didn't need that, but recognition. She saw him, all of him, and she chose to stand beside him anyway. "All right," he said. "Let's finish this." The fire ate through the fuel shed in great gulps of orange and black smoke, and the heat rolled across the yard in waves. Ayawamat pressed his face to the window gap and assessed. Burke's men had pulled back to the freight car, using it as cover while the flames did their work. Smart. If the depot caught everyone inside, would have to run straight into their guns. "We need to move," he said. "Move where?" Jamie asked, voice high with fear. "They've got us surrounded." "Not surrounded, contained." Ayawamat pointed toward the cemetery. "The dry creek bed. If we can reach it, we use the cover to circle around, hit them from behind." "That's 50 yards of open ground," Miguel protested. It's also full of smoke. Ayawamat turned to Clara. If we go now, while the fire's brightest, they won't see us until we're gone. Clara nodded. Dr. Morrow, you and Ruth stay here. Keep shooting out the windows so Burke thinks we're all still inside. Jamie, how long can you keep the telegraph running? As long as you need. Jamie said, though his hands shook on the key. Good. Clara met his eyes. If something happens to us, if Burke breaks through, you run. You hear me? Don't be a hero. Just run. Jamie's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Dr. Morrow pulled her revolver and moved to the window. Go. We'll make it look good. Ayawamat led Clara and Miguel to the back door, the one facing the cemetery. He cracked it open, no one visible, and slipped out, staying low, moving fast through the smoke. Clara followed, then Miguel, all three running in a crouch toward the dry creek bed. A shout went up behind them. They're running! Gunfire cracked. Bullets whined past, kicking up dirt. Ayawamat dove into the creek bed, rolled, came up beside a boulder. Clara landed beside him, breathing hard. Miguel skidded down the bank and pressed flat. You okay? Ayawamat asked Clara. She nodded, but her hand went to her ribs, where Dr. Morrow's stitches pulled. Blood seeped through the bandage. I'm fine. Keep moving. They scrambled along the creek bed, using the rocks and dried brush for cover. Behind them, Burke's men fired blindly into the smoke, but the shots went wide. Ahead, the cemetery loomed, crosses dark against the firelight. Then Ayawamat heard hoofbeats. Fast, coming from the south. 2 riders burst out of the smoke, Burke's reserve men, the ones who'd been circling to cut off escape. They saw the 3 figures in the creek and veered toward them, revolvers drawn. Down! Ayawamat shoved Clara behind a rock and raised his Winchester. He fired once, twice. The first shot missed, the second caught a horse in the shoulder. The animal screamed and went down, throwing its rider. The second rider fired back, and the bullet ricocheted off the rock inches from Ayawamat's face, spraying stone chips. Miguel popped up and fired. The second rider jerked, clutched his side, and slumped in the saddle. His horse bolted, carrying the wounded man back toward the train. The thrown rider scrambled to his feet and ran. Ayawamat let him go, one less gun to fight. They pushed deeper into the cemetery, weaving between graves, until they reached the big cottonwood. Eric Weiss's grave. Clara paused there, just for a heartbeat, and pressed her hand to the marker. I'm finishing this, she whispered. For you. Then they moved on. They circled wide, using the cemetery and the dry creek as cover, until they reached the rail line south of the train. From here, Ayawamat could see Burke's men clearly, 4 still standing, plus Burke himself. Kangi was nowhere in sight, probably still near the well or circling for another angle. We hit them from here, Ayawamat said. Fast hard, and then we move before they can regroup. Clara checked her Winchester. On your signal. Ayawamat sighted on the nearest man, one of the torchbearers who'd fired the shed. He exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The shot took the man in the back, and he fell without a sound. Clara and Miguel fired together. Another man dropped. The remaining 2 scrambled for better cover, shouting in confusion. Burke roared orders, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Then everything went wrong again. Sheriff Malloy's wagon rolled into the yard from the east lantern, swinging on the driver's bench. The sheriff himself sat hunched over the reins, face pale in the firelight. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the depot and stood, one hand raised. Clara Weiss, he shouted. You are under arrest for destruction of railroad property and theft of company documents. Come out peacefully and no one else gets hurt. Ayawamat swore. Malloy was bought, everyone knew it, but his badge still carried weight. If he arrested Clara here in front of witnesses, Burke could claim the law was on his side. Clara stood, rage blazing in her eyes. "Malloy, you coward." The sheriff's face twisted. "I'm sorry, Clara, but this is the law. This is murder." Clara stepped forward, and Ayawamat grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Oh, wait," he hissed. "Something's wrong." Malloy climbed down from the wagon, slowly moving like a man heading to his own hanging. He approached Clara with his hands out, empty, and his voice dropped so only those close could hear. "I'm sorry," he said again. "But Burke's got my brother. If I don't bring you in, he'll kill him." Clara's fury flickered. "What? My brother owes money. Bad debts. Burke bought the paper, threatened to have him hanged unless I helped." Malloy's voice cracked. "I didn't want this, but I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Clara said coldly. "Not when it's family." Malloy's eyes pleaded. "Please, just come with me. I'll take you to the jail wagon, and tomorrow—" "Tomorrow she's dead," Ayawamat cut in. "And you know it." Malloy looked at him, and for a moment Ayawamat saw the truth in the man's face, shame, fear, and the hollow resignation of someone who'd sold his soul and knew it. Then Burke's voice rang out. "Enough talking. Malloy, put her in the wagon now." Malloy reached for Clara's arm. She stepped back, and Miguel raised his rifle. "Don't touch her." "Please," Malloy whispered. "Don't make this harder." Ayawamat made a decision. He stepped between Clara and the sheriff, close enough to speak low. "You want to make this right? Then give her a chance. Untie the wagon traces. When the shooting starts, slap the horses and let them bolt." Malloy's eyes widened. "I can't. You can." Ayawamat held his gaze. "Or you live with knowing you helped kill her." For a long moment, Malloy stood frozen. Then slowly, he nodded. Burke's patience snapped. "Malloy, get her in the wagon, or I'll do it myself." The sheriff turned and walked back to the wagon, hands shaking. He climbed up, took the reins, and with a quick, furtive movement loosened the leather traces connecting the team to the wagon frame. Then he gestured for Clara to approach. Clara looked at Ayawamat. He nodded. She walked forward, head high, and climbed into the back of the wagon. Malloy locked the door with a key, then pocketed it and sat back on the bench. Burke smiled, satisfied. "Good. Now let's finish burning that depot and—" Ayawamat whistled sharp and piercing. Miguel and Dr. Morrow fired from their positions. The shots slammed into the freight car, ricocheting wildly. Burke's men dove for cover. In the chaos, Ayawamat sprinted for the wagon, leaped onto the driver's bench, and smacked the horses' rumps with the flat of his hand. The team bolted. The loosened traces snapped free, and the wagon lurched forward, wheels rattling, Clara clinging to the bars in the back. Malloy tried to grab the reins and fell off the bench into the dirt. "Go!" Clara shouted. "Don't stop." But Ayawamat wasn't in the driver's seat. He'd already jumped clear, rolling into the shadow of the depot, and was running back toward the freight train where Burke's men were regrouping, because he'd seen something that changed everything. Kangi was climbing onto the boxcar, roof rifle in hand, positioning himself for a clear shot at Clara's escaping wagon. Ayawamat ran faster than he'd ever run in his life. The night freight sat like a black iron beast, steam hissing from its joints, heat radiating from the boiler. Ayawamat sprinted across the rail yard, boots pounding ties, lungs burning. Above him, Kangi settled into position on the boxcar roof rifle barrel, tracking the wagon as it rattled toward the darkness. Ayawamat didn't shout a warning, didn't waste breath. He grabbed the ladder rungs and hauled himself up the side of the car, hand over hand, the metal still hot from the day's sun. His wounded shoulder screamed, but he ignored it and kept climbing. He reached the roof, just as Kangi fired. The shot cracked across the night. In the distance, the wagon swerved. Ayawamat couldn't tell if Clara was hit or just dodging. No time. He launched himself across the roof and tackled Kangi from behind. They crashed together, rolling across the curved metal surface, grappling for control. Kangi's rifle clattered away, bouncing off the roof edge and falling into the dark. Ayawamat drove his knee into Kangi's ribs, but his cousin twisted through an elbow that split Ayawamat's lip and kicked him away. They scrambled to their feet, facing each other atop the swaying boxcar. Below, Burke's men shouted and fired blindly into the smoke. Behind them, the fuel shed collapsed in a shower of sparks. Between them, every old wound and bitter word hung in the air like smoke. You never knew when to quit. Kangi spat blood running from his nose. And you never knew when to listen. Ayawamat shot back. They circled, and then Kangi lunged. They grappled again, fists and elbows, fighting with the brutal efficiency of two men trained by the same elders. Kangi hooked Ayawamat's leg, and they both went down, sliding toward the edge of the roof. Ayawamat caught the roof lip with one hand, stopping their fall. But Kangi pulled a hidden derringer from his belt and jammed it toward Ayawamat's face. Ayawamat grabbed Kangi's wrist, forcing the gun away. The derringer fired the shot, blowing a hole in the boxcar roof inches from Ayawamat's head. His ears rang, but he held on, squeezing Kangi's wrist until bones ground together. Kangi snarled and drove his forehead into Ayawamat's face. Stars exploded. Blood poured from Ayawamat's nose, but he didn't let go. Instead, he used Kangi's momentum to roll them both over, around, teetering on the edge of the roof, and then they fell. They hit the ground hard, 10 feet down, landing in the scrub beside the tracks. The impact drove the air from Ayawamat's lungs. He gasped, struggling to rise, and saw Kangi crawling toward a revolver, lying in the dirt, one of the fallen men's guns. Ayawamat threw himself forward, catching Kangi's ankle, dragging him back. Kangi kicked the heel of his boots, smashing Ayawamat's jaw, but Ayawamat held on with grim desperation. They rolled toward the edge of the embankment, where the dry creek bed waited below. And then Ayawamat heard it, the sound that changed everything. Thunder. Not the rumble of the train, not gunfire. Real thunder rolling down from the mountains to the west, where dark clouds had been gathering unseen during the fight. Lightning flashed, illuminating the peaks, and seconds later, the rain came. Not gentle, not gradual. A wall of water, cold and hard, driven by mountain winds. A cloudburst, the kind that turned dry creek beds into raging torrents in minutes. Flash flood. Ayawamat gasped, and even as he said it, he heard the roar building in the darkness upstream. Kangi heard it too. His eyes went wide. They were at the edge of the creek bed, the same creek bed where the culvert ran under the tracks, where the vault held the ledger, where moments ago there had been nothing but cracked earth and smooth stones. Now water exploded down the channel like a living thing, brown and churning, carrying debris and rocks, and the raw power of a mountain storm condensed into a narrow space. They both scrambled backward, but the embankment gave way. They tumbled down into the shallows at the edge of the torrent, waist-deep the current, immediately trying to drag them under. Kangi grabbed for a boulder to anchor himself. Ayawamat caught a willow root, clinging as the water pulled at his legs. "Help me!" Kangi shouted, and for the first time, Ayawamat heard real fear in his cousin's voice. Ayawamat reached out their hands, almost touching across 3 feet of churning water. But then Kangi's other hand moved toward the knife still tucked in his belt. "Still," Ayawamat said, more sad than angry, "even now." Kangi's face twisted shame and rage and something desperate. "I can't go back with nothing. I can't face them knowing I was wrong about you." "Then don't," Ayawamat said. "Come with me. Tell them the truth." For a heartbeat, Kangi's hand hovered between the knife and Ayawamat's outstretched fingers. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, young, scared, lost. Then the boulder he was clinging to shifted. Kangi's eyes went wide. He reached for Ayawamat's hand, and the current took him. He slammed backward into the torrent head, striking a submerged rock with a sound Ayawamat would hear in nightmares. Kangi's body tumbled lifeless downstream toward the culvert. The water sucked him into the stone tunnel, and seconds later he wedged against the iron grate that protected the cistern intake, face down, unmoving. Ayawamat dragged himself up the bank, shaking, and collapsed on his back, gasping at the sky. Rain hammered his face cold and clean, washing away blood and soot and the weight of too many years. Above him, stars wheeled behind breaking clouds. His chest ached with something more than exhaustion grief, maybe, or the hollow relief of a fight finally finished. Then the sound of a rifle being cocked snapped him back to the present. He rolled to his feet and looked up. Burke stood on the tracks above, revolver aimed at Ayawamat's chest. Behind him, the last of his men dragged Clara from the wagon. She'd been stopped 100 yards out, cut off by fallen telegraph poles Burke's men had toppled across the road. "Enough," Burke said. His voice was cold, final. "Your fight's done, Scout. Time to finish this." But before Burke could fire a new sound, cut through the rain, a train whistle different from the freight, sharper, urgent. Coming fast from the east. All heads turned. Through the rain and smoke, a headlamp blazed the morning local running hours early, and on the front platform stood two men in federal marshals' coats, rifles raised. "Burke," one of the marshals shouted through a speaking trumpet. "Drop your weapons, you're under arrest." Burke's face went white. He spun, saw the local barreling toward the station, and panic flashed in his eyes. His remaining men broke and ran, one toward the horses, another into the wheat, both desperate to escape before the law arrived. Burke grabbed Clara, yanking her in front of him as a shield revolver pressed to her temple. "Stay back or she dies." The train screeched to a halt, brakes sparking. The marshals jumped down, rifles raised, but they didn't dare shoot with Clara in the way. Dr. Morrow and Jamie emerged from the depot, weapons ready but helpless. Ayawamat moved slowly, carefully, circling through the rain to Burke's flank. His hand crept to the small knife at his belt and the one he'd taken from Kangi at the well. His fingers closed around the hilt. The rain made everything slick, made footing treacherous, made throwing nearly impossible. "Burke," Clara said, voice steady despite the gun at her head and the rain streaming down her face. "It's over. You can't run, you can't hide. The ledger's already in federal hands." Dr. Morrow copied everything. Burke's jaw tightened. "Then I've got nothing to lose?" "Yes, you do." Clara's eyes found Ayawamat over Burke's shoulder just for a second, and in that glance passed a lifetime of trust. "You can still walk away breathing." Burke laughed, a brittle sound, nearly lost in the rain. "Walk away to a noose. No thanks." His finger tightened on the trigger, and time seemed to slow. Ayawamat saw Clara's body tense, saw her start to twist away, buying him a fraction of a second. Saw Burke's finger whiten on the trigger, saw the hammer start to fall. The revolver fired. But Clara had jerked hard to the side at the last instant, throwing her weight against Burke's arm. The shot went wide by inches, the bullet cracking past her ear close enough to singe hair. And in that same heartbeat, Ayawamat threw the knife. Exhausted, rain-blind, barely able to stand, but the throw was true. The blade tumbled through the rain and buried itself in Burke's gun hand. Burke screamed and dropped the revolver. Clara twisted, drove her elbow into his gut, and broke free. The marshals rushed forward. They tackled Burke, slammed him to the muddy ground, and cuffed his wrists with iron shackles. Burke cursed and spat, but it was over. Done. Ayawamat stumbled forward. Clara ran to him, and they met halfway, collapsing together in the mud and rain. She grabbed his face with both hands, eyes searching his. and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she pulled him close, forehead to forehead, and whispered through the rain, "You showed me." He couldn't answer. Didn't need to. They stayed there breathing together, while around them the world slowly stopped burning, and the rain washed everything clean. Jamie appeared limping fast through the puddles, face split in a wild grin despite the rain. "Did you see that? Did you see I got a reply from Sand Creek? They rushed the marshal's train when they got my message. The dispatcher ordered them to leave at midnight instead of dawn." He laughed, a sound edged with hysteria and relief and the bone-deep exhaustion of surviving the impossible. "We did it. We actually did it." Miguel and Ruth emerged from the depot, supporting Dr. Morrow between them. The doctor's face was soot-stained, but fierce rain running in rivulets down her cheeks. Burke's men scattered. 2 are wounded, 1's dead, the rest ran. Malloy's in custody, gave himself up to the marshals. The lead marshal, a grizzled man with a silver badge and eyes like flint, approached Clara and Ayawamat, where they still sat in the mud. He offered a hand to help them up. "Someone want to tell me what in blazes happened here?" he asked. Clara stood wincing as her ribs pulled and faced him. Rain plastered her hair to her skull, and her dress was torn and bloody, but she stood tall. "My name is Clara Weiss. My husband was station master here until Burke had him killed to hide a smuggling operation. We have evidence, 2 years of freight records, witness testimony, and a confession from Sheriff Malloy that will prove Burke's been stealing rifles from the railroad and selling them off books, then planning to torch this station and claim the land." She gestured toward the flooded creek bed. "Everything you need to convict Burke is in a burial vault inside that culvert. Proof he's been altering manifests, bribing officials, and murdering anyone who got in his way." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am." "It's the truth." Clara pulled the army letter from her bodice, somehow still dry, protected by oilcloth, and handed it to him. "And this proves that the man standing beside me isn't a traitor. He's a hero who saved 200 lives. His name is Ayawamat, and without him, Burke would have burned us all alive tonight." The marshal read the letter slowly, rain beating on the paper, then looked at Ayawamat with new respect. "You negotiated the ceasefire with Major Kincaid?" Ayawamat nodded, too exhausted for words. "Major mentioned it in dispatches. Said he'd never met a braver man. Saved a lot of bloodshed." The marshal folded the letter and handed it back to Clara. "You've got my word this goes into the official record. Burke hangs and your names get cleared." He paused. Both of them. Relief hit Ayawamat like a breaking wave. His knees tried to buckle, but Clara caught him, steadying him with surprising strength despite her own wounds. "You all right?" she asked softly, just for him. "I will be." Behind them, the rain began to ease. The storm was passing as quickly as it had come, leaving the air cool and clean, the sky beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The fuel shed smoldered, reduced to blackened timber, but the depot stood scorched, damaged, but intact. Just like them. The marshals secured Burke in the jail wagon, the same one Malloy had brought for Clara. Burke sat chained and silent, face blank with defeat. His remaining men were rounded up over the next hour as the rain stopped and the sun rose, painting the wet plains gold. Dr. Morrow treated the wounded friend and foe alike, because that's what frontier doctors did. She stitched Ayawamat's split lip, rebound his shoulder, and checked Clara's ribs with gentle, competent hands. "You're going to hurt for a week," she told Clara, "but you'll heal. No permanent damage." "What about him?" Clara nodded toward Ayawamat. Dr. Morrow glanced at him, then back at Clara, and something knowing flickered in her eyes. "He'll heal too, especially with someone to make sure he actually rests." Clara's cheeks colored, but she didn't look away. Jamie retrieved the ledger from the vault. The flood had risen high enough to lap at the door, but the seal had held, and the oilcloth had kept everything dry. He presented it to the marshal with pride, water still dripping from his clothes. The marshal flipped through the pages, noting the careful records, the damning evidence. "This is thorough work. Your husband did well, Mrs. Weiss." "He did," Clara said quietly. "He just didn't live to see justice done." "Well, you finished it for him." The marshal closed the ledger. "And when Burke hangs, you can tell him that." Malloy was brought forward in handcuffs, looking small and broken. He couldn't meet Clara's eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely audible. "For all of it." Clara studied him for a long moment. Rain still dripped from her hair, mixing with the mud on her face. "You loosened the wagon. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to. That counts for something." Malloy looked up, eyes wet. "Does it count enough?" "That's for a judge to decide," Clara said. "But I'll testify that you helped us at the end, that you chose right when it mattered most." The marshal made a note in his book. "Your cooperation will be submitted as a mitigating factor. Might keep you from the noose, might not. But at least you'll face trial instead of a bullet." Malloy nodded, accepting that, and was led away. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the rain clouds, a sense of unreality settled over the station. They'd survived. Against all odds, against fire and flood and bullets, they'd held the line until help came. Miguel and Ruth brought food, bread and eggs again, this time cooked over the stove that still worked despite everything. They ate together on the depot porch, watching the marshals load Burke and his men onto the freight cars for transport to Cheyenne. "What happens now?" Jamie asked, still dripping wet but grinning. The marshal, overhearing, turned. "We take Burke east for trial. He'll hang no question with this evidence. His accomplices will face charges. Malloy, too, though his cooperation might earn him prison instead of the rope." He looked at Clara. "As for the station, the railroad's sending a federal receiver to assess damages and determine next steps. My guess, they'll offer you compensation and a permanent position if you want it." "Do I want it?" Clara asked, more to herself than anyone. Ayawamat, sitting beside her, said nothing. Just waited. Clara looked around at the scorched depot, the cemetery where Eric rested the rail line, stretching toward distant mountains. At Jamie with his bum leg and bad ears still grinning like he'd conquered the world. At Miguel and Ruth, quiet and steady, who'd risked everything for a neighbor. At Dr. Morrow, already planning her clinic with the fierce determination of someone who refused to let the frontier win. And at Ayawamat, bruised and bloody, and finally free of the weight that had bent his spine for months. "I think," Clara said slowly, "I want to stay, but not because I owe the past, because I want the future." She looked at Ayawamat. "What about you? The mountains are still there. You could go." He met her eyes, and in them he saw the question beneath the question. "Do you want to stay with me?" "Here, I could," he agreed. "But I think I'd rather build something than run from something." Clara's smile was like sunrise. "Then stay. Help me rebuild this place. Help me make it what it should have been all along, a station where people are welcome, where the law matters, where the telegraph stays open no matter what." "A home," Ayawamat said. "Yes." She reached for his hand, and this time neither of them pulled away. Their fingers laced together, calloused and scarred and steady. "A home." Dr. Morrow cleared her throat. "Well, if you two are done making eyes at each other, I've got work to do. But Clara, I'll need space for a clinic. And Ayawamat, if you're staying, I'll need someone with sense to help build it." "We'll help," Miguel said. Ruth and me, we're not going anywhere. Too stubborn to leave now. Jamie stood wincing on his bad leg. And I'm staying too. Someone's got to run the telegraph, and I'm the best you've got. Clara laughed, and the sound was bright and clear, cutting through all the darkness like a bell. Then it settled. We rebuild. Together. The marshal's train left 2 hours later, taking Burke and his men east toward justice. As it pulled away, Clara and Ayawamat stood on the platform watching until the smoke disappeared into the horizon. Do you think they'll really hang him? Clara asked. Yes, Ayawamat said. The evidence is too strong, and the railroad doesn't forgive theft. Good. Clara's hand tightened on his. Eric can rest now, and so can I. They stood in silence for a while, feeling the sun warm their faces, listening to Jamie test the repaired telegraph line inside. The key chattered to life, and Jamie's voice called out, "Got a message from Cheyenne Railroad sending a work crew and timber. Should be here in 3 days." Clara smiled. 3 days to clean up and get ready. Think we can manage? I think, Ayawamat said, we can manage anything. They walked back inside together, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Ayawamat felt the weight of homelessness lift. Not because he had a place to sleep or a job to do, but because he had people who chose to stand beside him, who saw his strength and his scars and didn't ask him to be anything other than what he was. That night after the work was done, and the station was as secure as they could make it, Clara found Ayawamat sitting on the cemetery fence looking at the stars. The rain had washed the sky clean, and the Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. She climbed up beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Kangi," he admitted. "I keep wondering if I could have saved him. If I'd tried harder, reached faster." "You tried," Clara interrupted gently. "He made his choice when he went for the knife instead of your hand. That's on him, not you." Ayawamat nodded, but the ache remained. "We were boys together. Learned to hunt, to fight, to survive. He was like a brother." "I know." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "But sometimes the people we love make choices we can't fix. All we can do is remember them and try to do better." They sat in silence, and gradually the ache eased into something bearable. Grief, yes, but also acceptance. Kangi had chosen pride over truth, glory over life, and in the end, that choice had killed him. Ayawamat couldn't change that, could only honor his memory by choosing differently. "Show me your full strength," Clara said softly, echoing her first request. "You did that. You showed me courage and skill and honor. But you also showed me something else." "What?" She lifted her head and looked at him, her face serious in the starlight. "You showed me that strength isn't just fighting. It's also choosing mercy when you could choose vengeance. Choosing truth when lies are easier. Choosing to stay when running would be safer." She paused. "Choosing to build instead of destroy." Ayawamat looked at her. This woman who'd stood barefoot on a depot porch and asked a stranger to fight beside her, who'd faced fire and flood and bullets without breaking, who'd looked at his scars and seen a man worth believing in. "I learned that from you," he said. Clara smiled. "Then I guess we taught each other." She leaned closer, and Ayawamat found himself leaning too, drawn by something stronger than gravity. Their lips met soft and careful, a kiss that tasted of smoke and rain and the promise of tomorrows they'd earned the hard way. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's eyes were bright. "Stay," she whispered. "Not because I need you to fight for me, but because I want you beside me when I fight for myself." "I'll stay," Ayawamat promised, "for as long as you'll have me." Then you're staying a long time. 3 months later, the morning train whistled into Dead Crow Station just after dawn, steam hissing as it braked beside the new platform. The depot gleamed with fresh paint, white walls, green trim, and a sign that read, Dead Crow Station. C. Weiss and A. Ayawamat, station masters. Clara stood on the porch ledger under one arm, watching the passengers disembark. Beside her, Ayawamat checked the freight manifest, noting the shipments that would need to be sorted and logged. Behind them, Jamie worked the telegraph, with the easy confidence of someone who'd found his calling. Dr. Morrow's clinic stood beside the depot, a neat two-room structure with a red cross painted on the door. She was inside now, treating a farmer's broken arm, her voice carrying through the open window, calm, competent, never flustered. Miguel and Ruth's wheat field stretched golden to the east, heavy with grain, ready for harvest. They'd sold their first crop to the railroad at fair price, and with the profit they'd hired 2 laborers who'd been displaced by Burke's schemes. Small acts of justice building towards something larger. The station had become what Clara had dreamed, a place where people were welcome, where the law mattered, where the frontier felt a little less wild and a little more like home. A rider approached from the North Lakota, young with wary eyes. He dismounted and approached Ayawamat slowly. "Are you Ayawamat?" "I am." The rider reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded letter. "This came to the camps, from the cavalry. It's a copy of Major Kincaid's commendation. Someone sent it to the elders." Ayawamat took the letter, the same one Clara had found in the ledger, now circulating among the people who'd once called him traitor. "What did they say?" The rider's face softened. "They said they were wrong, that the rumors were lies spread by Kengi Red Knife, who died working with white thieves. They said..." He paused. "They said to tell you that you're welcome to come home, that your name is honored." Ayawamat's throat tightened. He'd carried the shame for so long that the weight of its absence felt strange, unreal. "Thank them. But tell them I have a home now." The rider nodded, understanding. He glanced at Clara, at the station, at the life Ayawamat had built from ash and blood and choice. "A good home." "The best," Ayawamat agreed. The rider remounted and rode north, carrying the message back to the camps. Ayawamat watched him go and felt Clara's hand slip into his. "You could have gone with him," she said. "I would have understood." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "But I meant what I said. This is home now. You're home." Clara leaned into him, and they stood together, watching the sun climb higher, turning the wheat fields to gold. Behind them, the telegraph chattered with the day's messages, orders, news connections between distant places. Proof that even in the wild frontier, people were finding ways to reach each other. A freight wagon rolled up, driven by a man Ayawamat didn't recognize. The driver tipped his hat. "Morning. Got a delivery for Clara Weiss Lumber and Supplies, courtesy of the railroad. Where do you want it?" Clara consulted her notes. "Stack it by the new freight shed. We're expanding, adding a general store and a boarding house." The driver whistled. "Place is really growing." "That's the idea," Clara said. "Dead Crow's not dying anymore. It's living." She wasn't wrong. In the 3 months since Burke's arrest, the station had transformed. The railroad had sent workers and materials, compensating Clara generously for the damages and offering her a permanent contract as station master. She'd accepted on the condition that Ayawamat be named co-manager, and the company had agreed without hesitation. Word had spread about the widow and the warrior who'd held the station against impossible odds. Travelers stopped to hear the story. Settlers came looking for land and opportunity. The telegraph hummed with traffic connecting Dead Crow to a dozen other towns, and with each message the frontier felt a little smaller, a little more civilized. It wasn't paradise. The work was hard, the hours long, the challenges endless. But it was theirs, built by their hands, defended with their blood, sustained by their will. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned violet and gold, Clara and Ayawamat walked to the cemetery. They did this every week, tending Eric's grave and the others who rested there. Clara set fresh wildflowers on the marker and knelt brushing dust from the carved letters. "I did it, Eric," she said quietly. "I finished what you started. Burke hanged last month in Cheyenne. Malloy got 10 years prison less than he deserved, but he'll pay for what he did. And the station is safe, growing, becoming something better than it was." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more personal. "I miss you. I always will. But I'm not alone anymore. And I think you'd approve of the man who helped me." She glanced at Ayawamat. "He's stubborn and quiet and braver than anyone I've ever known. He sees me, Eric, really sees me, the way you did." Ayawamat crouched beside her, laying a hand on her shoulder. "I never knew your husband. But if he was half as strong as you, he must have been a good man." "He was." Clara covered his hand with hers. "And so are you." They stayed a while longer, watching the stars emerge one by one, feeling the evening wind cool their faces. Behind them, the depot glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Inside, Jamie was playing a harmonica badly, but enthusiastically, while Miguel and Ruth laughed at something Dr. Morrow said. Home. Not the home Ayawamat had been born to, not the life he'd imagined as a young warrior learning to hunt and fight. But home nonetheless, earned through fire and flood through blood and choice, through the simple, profound act of standing beside someone and refusing to let the world grind them down. Clara stood and offered him her hand. "Come on. Jamie's making stew, and if we don't get back soon, Miguel will eat all the cornbread." Ayawamat took her hand and rose. "Can't have that." They walked back together, fingers entwined, and as they reached the porch, Clara paused. "Ayawamat." "Yes." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight, her eyes were clear and bright, and full of something that made his chest ache in the best possible way. "Thank you. For staying. For fighting. For choosing this place, this life." She paused. "For choosing me." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing the freckles across her nose, and kissed her with all the words he couldn't quite say: gratitude and wonder, and the bone-deep certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. "Always," he said when they finally parted. "I'll always choose you." Clara smiled, and it was brighter than any lamp warmer, than any fire. "Good. Because I'm choosing you right back." They went inside together, and the door closed behind them, shutting out the vast darkness of the prairie, and holding in the light and laughter and life they'd built from nothing. Outside, the wind whispered through the wheat, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains. The rails gleamed under the stars, stretching east and west, north and south, connecting everything to everything else. And above it all, the telegraph wires hummed with messages, stories, and news and promises carried across the wilderness by copper and code. Dead Crow Station stood solid and strong, a beacon in the darkness, a proof that even in the wildest places, people could build something worth defending, something worth fighting for, something worth calling home. And in the morning, the trains would run again,